I'm Brittany Houston, Sales and Marketing Coordinator for Murray Electric System, and you're watching Ask the Expert. This month we have a special episode with General Manager Tony Thompson talking about our tree trimming and our Trade a Tree program here at Murray Electric. Well, thank you for being here with us this morning. Now, I know that tree trimming is a big part of the operations of Murray Electric. Can you tell us a little more about the importance of the tree trimming of our system?
Sure, Brittany. Tree trimming is one of those necessary evils that we have to deal with in our business. I'm sure people see our crews and our contract crews out, especially in the summertime, trimming trees, but it is a very vital part of what we do, mostly because it is probably the most direct affecting issue that we have in dealing with reliability. In other words, keeping the lights on, which is what we do and what we're supposed to do. And trees are a big factor in affecting reliability. So we have to maintain a clearance between the overhead lines that we have out on the streets and alleyways of Murray and trees. Now, no one likes for their trees to be trimmed, and we don't like to trim people's trees. We don't wish we didn't have to do that, but unfortunately, it's just a part of our business. And so we do that with a contractor. We don't use our own crews, although we used to do that in years gone by, but we use a contract crew. Asplin Tree Trimming is a nationwide, actually a worldwide company. They're very qualified. They have crews all over North America, Canada, and actually other parts of the world. So they're probably the largest tree trimming contractor in the world. And we have used them for several years. It really is cheaper for us to maintain a tree trimming contractor than to provide our own crews and the vehicles and equipment that it takes to do that. And so we've been happy with Asplin and the crews they provide to us.
Right. Now, how much does it cost our system, or how much does tree trimming cost our system each year?
Well, normally we budget around $100,000, and that's for 6 months of trimming. It's another advantage of using a contractor is that we don't have to keep them year round. Wintertime is because of weather and all, you don't get a lot of work done, so we've tried to use them just during the spring, summer, and fall months to do trimming, and we get the most work out of them during that time with less weather interruptions. The ground is usually dry, so when we have to get a truck off of the road, it doesn't sink into the mud. Sure. So we try to budget around $100,000. Now, obviously that goes up year to year, and this year we're actually going to budget about twice the amount that we have been because we're going to concentrate, so we're actually bringing in 2 crews this year. Right. One crew will continue the routine trimming out on the streets, off the poles and wires that are out on the streets and alleyways, but we're also concentrating this year on what we call rear lot line installations, and that's where poles have been placed in the back of properties away from the roads. It's a little tougher to get into those places, so we're bringing in a crew that specializes in that work. They'll do most of their work will actually be done by climbing the tree and cutting the limbs away from the wires there. We're going to try to get a significant amount of clearance there so we don't have to go back year to year. Don't know if we can get that done in 1 year or 1 6-month interval or not. It may take a couple of years to bring them back. So we are budgeting, basically we're doubling our budget this year to allow for that additional crew.
Okay. What should customers know about tree trimming and how it affects our electrical reliability, and then also in turn the cost of electricity?
Well, I doubt if people think a lot about what that costs, but there's a lot of lot of things that people need to realize about trees and the way they affect their electric service. One thing, when you look at a tree next to a line, most people think as long as that tree's not touching that line, then there's plenty of clearance. Why should we have to trim it anymore? Well, the fact is that a tree, as we all know, during the wind can move many feet from a center line position. So we have to allow for a tree movement when we do our clearing. So that means that several feet, maybe 15 to 20 feet sometimes, has to be maintained between the tree where it normally stands and where it would be if the wind's blowing 50 miles an hour. The other thing that has a big impact is ice during the winter. We all remember the ice storm in 2009. The biggest one factor of power outages was trees, and that was trees covered with ice. Now, most people would think of ice affecting an electric system as being ice that builds up on the wires and the poles. Actually, that caused us very little problems in '09. We lost a few poles just due to the sheer weight of ice, but our poles and cross arms and the wire that is up there is really built to withstand several inches of ice buildup before it would actually break. So we have built extra strength into our poles and infrastructure to allow for that. But trees don't take ice very good. So when a tree is covered with ice and then that limb or the whole tree breaks over and crashes across a line, then that takes everything down, and our lines and poles and cross arms aren't built to withstand the weight of a huge oak tree crashing across it. So that is a big impact on our system reliability, and that's something that we have to work at every year to maintain that extra clearance. And we have to take into account that on a beautiful sunny summer day when trees are in full leaf and they're beautiful out there and everybody loves trees, but we have to think about them, what they're going to look like in the middle of the winter covered with ice. So the other thing that people need to know is there's a lot of trees on private property that we don't normally trim. And those trees might be right up next to a house, in other words. Well, we would never go in and trim those trees, but in an ice storm, or even in a windstorm, those trees can come down, can break out and crash across someone's service line, and that is the line that usually runs from the pole in front of the house to the house, and we call that a service line. And when those trees come down across the service line, it can rip that wire down. Not only that, it can rip the whole meter base off the wall. Well, that is the responsibility of the homeowner to keep that meter base on and attached to the wall. So all we can do at that point is come out and cut the wire loose. Then the homeowner has to call an electrician to come in and put the meter base back up on the house. Sometimes that takes a day or two. So you could be without power, and especially in an ice storm where you have maybe hundreds of meter bases that have been ripped off the wall. And I'm only telling that to say this, that homeowners need to also be aware that they may need to contract with a tree trimmer to come into their yard and keep trees trimmed that we don't have the time or resources to do. We concentrate on the main lines and we'll keep those trimmed, but homeowners have some responsibility themselves. And I often tell people, go out into your yard and look at your service line coming from the pole to your house, see how close trees are, and if necessary, you may need to get a tree trimmer, or in some cases, people can do it themselves, and cut a few of those big limbs away from that service line so that when we have an ice storm or a windstorm, that those trees don't affect your service reliability.
Right, absolutely. Now I know that Murray Electric has kind of reintroduced the Trade-A-Tree program. Can you explain a little bit more about that to us and how that works?
Several years ago, I'm going to say back in the early 2000 time frame, we came up with a program which is fairly common among electric utilities called Trade-A-Tree, we called it. Some people call it tree replacement. But What that program did was when we had trees growing out on those main lines that we had to come back year after year to keep trimmed, which is really not good for a tree. Trimming a tree is really not natural. Topping trees, you really should never do that unless you have dead limbs there that you want to take out. But anytime a tree is topped, it actually promotes more growth in the tree, and it also opens that tree up for insects and decay to come in and actually damages the tree. So more than likely, if you've driven around Murray and you've paid attention, you've seen trees that we have routinely had to trim. Those trees are really slowly, they begin to die, and eventually they will die and they'll have to be removed. So we introduced this Trade-A-Tree program so that people could call us and we would come out, and if it was a tree that we were routinely having to trim, we would remove that tree, cut it completely down, and then we would contract with a nursery to come in and plant another tree in its place so that you now have another tree to replace that one. But it would be a low-growing species of tree that would not grow up to a full height that would interfere with our lines.
Right.
Now, we were very aggressive in that program, like I say, back in the early 2000 time frame. And I don't know how many trees we replaced in Murray, but I would say thousands.
Sure.
Since then, since we were so successful and our customers were so good at participating and cooperating with us, a lot of those problem trees are gone. We don't have to trim those anymore. In fact, it's one of the reasons that we were able to cut down to a 6-month trimming cycle, is because we removed so many trees in that time frame, and we replaced them, but we no longer have to go back and trim those trees. Well, once we kind of got through that program, we kind of temporarily, I would say, halted the Trade-A-Tree. We just didn't put as much emphasis on it, and we weren't getting very many requests for that. But here in the last year or so, we've reintroduced that program. We are going to offer that. Now, we're going to be a lot more selective in the trees that we will agree to remove than we were back in the old days. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it's expensive. It costs us money to do that, and in turn that has to be put back into the rate base, so everybody pays for that. Now, that shouldn't bother people, because every utility in the United States or anywhere that is in business has operational costs associated with tree trimming. So that's just normal. But taking a tree down takes a lot of time. It might take a full day to take one big oak tree down and completely. So that's a day lost where you could be going out and up and down the street and actually trimming. So we're going to be very selective in the trees that we agree to replace, but we will. There are trees out there that continue to cause us problems. We have to continue to go back to. So what we want people to do is, if they have a tree that they feel like is a good candidate for a replacement, to call us, and they might even talk to you, because we've kind of set you up as a point person on that.
Right.
And then we will send our operations superintendent, Mr. Wilson, out, and he will look at that tree and he will make the final determination whether that is a tree that we will agree to cut down and replace or not. Now, the way we're going to do this is, we may have our contract crews, the Asplin crews, come out and actually take down all of the limbs from that tree that could affect the wires, and then we will probably work with a private contractor, maybe local contract crews, to come in later and actually cut it to the ground and remove it.
Right.
So it may take a few weeks, could even be months, before that tree actually is removed, but we will remove it. And once it's removed, then we will work with the local nurseries to come in and plant a new tree there. Mm-hmm. And then we won't ever have to go back and deal with that again. So we are going to offer that, it's just going to be a little more, the guidelines are going to be a little more strict than maybe we were in the past.
Right, absolutely. Now, who do you suggest, if a customer does have a tree problem, maybe not necessarily wanting to see if a tree qualifies for the Trade a Tree program, but if they've got a tree problem, what's the best thing for them to do in that instant?
Well, of course, they can always call us, and excuse me, they can call our office and talk to our customer service people, and they'll put them in touch with appropriate people. But you know, we're always happy to come out and look at a tree and talk to customers about it if they think that there's a problem. A lot of people call us and they look to us for guidance on dealing with trees. Unfortunately, we just can't. Back in the old days, and when I say the old days, I talk about the days when I first began working at Murray Electric back in the 70s, and we used our own in-house crews. Well, we didn't, at that time, we didn't know the proper trimming techniques. We hadn't learned the proper way to do that, and we did a lot of what we call rounding over of trees, and that was producing that beautiful light bulb shaped tree. And we would set up with a truck and we would nip and tuck every little branch in there, and we'd make that tree look pleasing. What we didn't realize at that time, we were actually doing great harm to that tree. So we've gone to a different technique of trimming now, and we've researched this. We've worked with professional arborists and with the National Arbor Day Society. You can contact any professional nurseryman or whatever, and they will tell you that it is harmful to round over a tree or to top a tree. So we do what we call selective pruning. Selective pruning is the technique where you actually, instead of just cutting off the end of a branch, you take a branch all the way back to the trunk and you cut it off there. So sometimes that's a very large branch. But once you do that, that's much more healthy for the tree than just topping or trimming the tree. So it doesn't look as good when we're finished with the tree, but it's much more healthy for the tree, and hopefully it won't cause the tree to die. And what we can do over a period of time when we selectively prune a tree is we will train the limbs away from our lines and eventually get that tree so we don't have to trim it anymore. It won't be beautiful, unfortunately. The only trees that are beautiful are the ones that are completely away from the lines that we never have to trim, and we love those trees, and we want those trees to grow and be healthy. But the trees that affect our lines, we have to trim those. We have the right to trim those. Many of those trees are on what we call public right-of-way. That's the right-of-way either owned by the city or the state. And we have the right to go in and trim those trees even if the homeowner doesn't want to do that. Now, we don't like to get in a confrontation with a homeowner over a tree. And of course, people think that trees that are in their yard are their trees, and many times they are. What they don't often realize is we have not only the right, but we have an obligation to go in and trim those trees, because they not only affect the service reliability of the people that own that tree, but it's all their neighbors, all the people up and down the street. In fact, it could be everybody in Murray. Sometimes one tree can take out the whole grid. I mean, we've often heard of those instances where one tree out in the west somewhere grew up into a line and knocked out the whole grid. So it doesn't normally happen in Murray, but it can. So it's not just your tree, or your tree's not just affecting your service, it's affecting everybody's. So we have the right to do that, and we have an obligation to do that. And we will work with folks, and our customers are very good about that. They understand that, especially after the 2009 ice storm. I don't think people realized the damages and the problems that trees can cause until we had that ice storm where our power was off for 40 some odd hours. And I think people then understood, and they've been very good. So we're glad to work with folks. We don't want to come in and damage anybody's trees. We want to do it the right way And ultimately what we're doing is maintaining the reliability and keeping the lights on in Murray.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. If you do want more information, you can go to our website at www.murray-ky.net. And feel free to call our office if you have any questions, if you need to report any problems. That number is 270-753-5312. Again, it's 270-753-5312.